Everybody in. Everybody in.
Everybody in.
Everybody in.
Everybody in.
Everybody in.
Everybody in.
Everybody in.
Everybody in.
Everybody in.
Everybody in.
Everybody in.
Everybody in.
Everybody in.
Everybody.
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 Everybody in.
Nobody out.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, John, how you doing? How's everybody out there?
Let's hope good, I'm sure. So I know I've got a good crowd tonight. I'm John U. Bacon, local author, of course, one of Ken Fischer's 5,000 closest friends. We all feel that way, of course, I realize. Yes, I need a haircut. I'm aware of that fact. Just ask my mom, and maybe a shave also. But hey, we're in full COVID mode right now. Fish, you look shockingly good for a man in quarantine. So well done.
Well, you know, I think you and I are both wearing a jacket. At least me, I'm wearing a jacket for the first time since March. So it feels good. How about you, pal?
Feels a little foreign, but we're getting used to it. I've also got my running shoes on because I'm fresh from my son's first baseball practice at 5 years old. So how about that? So
There you go.
we'll be getting to baseball here shortly, of course, in your case. So well, let's tee it up here. We've got an hour to talk. We'll have time for questions and answers, of course, near the end, about the last 20 minutes or so. Plenty to dive into here, of course, and shameless plug, naturally. Everybody in, nobody out. You see my flaps, of course, from where I'm noting this and that. Beautiful book, by the way. Very well packaged. U of M Press. Available now. You did a wonderful job. And you and I talked throughout this process. You've done a lot of things very well, but this is your first book. That one education, I believe.
Well, you know, one of the things I really appreciated, you know, folks, John is now a 6-time national best-selling author, 5 of those with the New York Times. So who's the go-to guy I go to when I need advice? And I had all kinds of questions, and he said, Fish, you can always write another one. So, you know, they made me, the University of Michigan Press made me cut 2/3 of my acknowledgements. You know, I have a lot of people I wanted to thank, but anyway, John, thank you for your good advice. Rob Pasick, another author who's a friend, you know, gave very good advice. You don't have to do it all in one book. So anyway, I had a lot of fun putting it together.
That is the rookie mistake, by the way, because you've had a whole lifetime to store it all up. It's your one chance, you feel like, so you feel like you have to put the whole world into that book. And by the way, wait a second. You scaled back your acknowledgements by 2/3. They're already the longest acknowledgement I've ever seen in my life. I'm a professional author. I read a lot of books, and I read the acknowledgements, actually. You had to scale it back by 2/3. That would have been a book by itself.
Well, I think I got good advice on that. And also during the text of the book, I had a couple of great editors, Robin Lee Pyle and Eric Engels, and they kept, Fish, it's about the story. You don't have to mention every single person that was involved in every single incident. You know, keep the story going. So I learned a little bit about narrative and suspense, you know, things that are natural to you, but, you know, I learned an awful lot by doing it, for sure.
Hey, what you relearn those lessons every book, because the current book I'm working on, same thing. It's not about this, it's about that. So your reader is the one you're trying to serve mainly.
Yeah.
Barbara Bush, by the way, in her memoir, it was interesting to a point, but she received a lot of negative reviews because she tried to thank everybody she ever met in her life in the course of the book. And that's the temptation, but therefore you're serving your friends and not the readers. So it's always a tricky balance, but well done. You did both very well, in my opinion. But you have said that you wrote the book for 3 reasons.
Yeah.
What are those?
Well, I think, first of all, I wanted to honor the man who came up with Everybody In, Nobody Out. His name is Patrick Hayes. He was the great impresario of Washington, D.C., founded an organization in 1966 called Washington Performing Arts Society. But prior to that, he was with the National Symphony, and he was with his Patrick Hayes Concert Bureau, but he was committed to desegregating the theaters and the lunch counters of Washington. And then when he formed this nonprofit organization, he wanted to be sure that the people in a still segregated Washington understood that the arts were going to be for everybody in this organization. And he selected as his first board chair Todd Duncan, the first Porgy and Bess, a distinguished voice teacher at Howard University. And when you saw the Irishman and the tall black man together representing the future of the arts in Washington, that meant a lot to everybody. And then he had an inclusion policy called EINO, EINO, everybody in, nobody out. So the first reason is honor my mentor, Patrick Hayes. Second was, people kept saying, Fish, that's a good story. You ought to put it in writing. And so I thought I ought to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other reason was this became the mantra. This became our guiding principle for 30 years at UMS. And so the story of UMS over the life of my tenure was really about the arts being for everybody. Get out of that Burton Memorial Tower and by management, by walking around, get out throughout Southeast Michigan, build relationships that are genuine, that are not exploitive. And these are relationships not just with communities of shared heritage, but the other arts organizations with whom we had very little relationship. And I look at Ann Glendon at the Ann Arbor Symphony, I look at Russ Collins, these became colleagues, and we began to do shows at the Michigan Theater and engage the Ann Arbor Symphony. Mary Stefik Blasky was another one. So we had a lot of work to do to get out of that tower. Then there were educational institutions, both post-secondary and then our own Ann Arbor Public Schools and 30 other schools. And then the local businesses, imagine what it'd be like, just go to the barbershop, go to Dascola Barbershop and go to the local restaurants, Savas and these other, Red Hawk and Knights, just waiting to be partners. So that was the third reason, is just to help people understand that's not just a guiding principle for Washington Performing Arts, but it became a guiding principle for us. And I think other organizations are adapting it and adopting it as well.
It's a beautiful philosophy. I quoted it in the previous book, of course, on End Zone on Michigan athletics, because your philosophy it applies to almost anything people want to do. Honestly, it's a wonderful approach, and it's not. You weren't trying to be charitable. You're trying to represent the community. Basically, you're trying to present the best that's out there across the board. Things that we've not always been exposed to, depending on which circle you're in, of course. And so, in that sense, it just made a much richer experience for all of us who, of course, love UMS.
Well, when you are in such a culturally rich region as Southeast Michigan, the largest concentration of Arabs outside the Middle East, predominantly Black population in Detroit, but you have a very rich diversity of Asian populations. And when you look at the Americas, both up to Canada and then Mexico, South America, and Central America, all of these are represented in this region, but we didn't have the kind of relationship you need to have if you're in the business of culture. And so, like I said, we were on a mission to get out of the tower and start building these relationships. And it became one of the most rewarding things for me, and I know members of our staff, as we built these relationships. And, we practiced 4 principles of partnership. There was the obvious ones of communication and cooperation, but the 2 more nuanced were vulnerability and reciprocity. And vulnerability means when you've been around for 110 years, which is where we were, and when I started out here, and you haven't had a relationship with these very rich cultural communities, that means you tread lightly. You don't behave like you're from the University of Michigan. Like, I'm from the University of Michigan and I'm here to help you. Wrong approach. It has to do with it has to do with listening, asking questions, taking your time to build these genuine relationships, and recognizing, they've been here, you haven't been there. And I learned so much from colleagues of mine who had much more experience with this than I did. And so I became active in professional associations and just learned an awful lot from my colleagues and from publications that were going. I can't thank my colleagues at Professionals and Chamber of Music America, these professional organizations that were brand new to me as a 42-year-old guy in a new field. I was just so eager to learn, and I found out we're a generous field. Our field's happy to help anybody that's curious, and with a colleague like Michael Kanjoka, who started when I did, he as an intern, we needed to learn about dance. We needed to learn about theater. These were not critical parts of UMS. We were great classical music presenters and chamber music presenters, but we had so much to learn in these other areas. And fortunately, we had great people locally, like Peter Sparling, helping us with dance, and then colleagues around the country to help us out.
Good stuff. I'm going to back it up to the beginning. We've already teased the middle, of course, but we'll get to more of that very soon. Young man from Plymouth, Michigan, French horn, and a swimmer. Tell us.
Well, about the swimmer, let me go back a little bit. I was very fortunate to be one of 4 kids in a family where the parents valued music and the arts. My dad was an organist and a pianist, and was able to be the first in his generation to go to college. And it was his being able to play piano for the Rutgers Glee Club that helped pay for his college education. So Dad knew both the instrumental and intrinsic value of music, like my mom did. It's good for you. It's good for discipline. The same thing that my coaches in swimming would say, good for discipline and teamwork and so on. And so we all took piano lessons, I think, starting in the 2nd grade. And we are my older brother, Jerry, my late brother, Jerry, my younger brother and sister, Norman and Martha. We all took piano lessons beginning like 2nd grade. And then interlocking became a key part of our life. To be able to go at age 10 to a summer camp where you not only got good music instruction, but guess who taught me how to swim?
Who?
Gus Steger. And Gus Steger, for those who don't know, was the coach at Michigan at the time, who won 4 national championships in 5 years in the same time I was going to Plymouth High School as a swimmer, as we were aspiring to be the state champ. So these guys were our heroes, guys like Frank Legacki. And it was Gus Steger that taught me to swim and encouraged me to swim that lake, swim Duck Lake, a mile long. Everybody else in the cabin had done it. I hadn't. And my counselors, Lee Kabuti, Lynn Doherty, encouraged me, and one rowed the boat while the fish was struggling. I think it took me an hour, but that helped me get involved in swimming. And sure enough, 1961, Plymouth High School, smallest high school, Class A high school in the state, won the state championship. And but I'll always be grateful to Gus. Frank Legacki reconnected me with Gus later in life, and we enjoyed a great relationship there.
Of course, Frank, our dear friend, the 1960, I believe it was, NCAA champion.
Yeah.
As well as, of course, a big UMS backer, as you know. So, athletics and UMS.
And dance. Frank and Alicia. Well, it's interesting that so many of our athletes and our physicians have become our greatest supporter of dance. Something about the body. That's how these guys have expressed themselves in athletics. I remember John Urbanchek, who was a great coach at Michigan, would bring Bowerman, the great breaststroker, Olympic breaststroker and a champion, to our theater in dance performances when he was a student. And Gus Steger had a deal with his wife because he said, "Honey, I want you to come to my swim meets." And she'd say, "Gus, you're coming to my concerts, and if you can't come, I'm bringing my bringing your swimmers." And that's how a guy like Stu Isaac got involved with UMS. Stu being a swimmer at Michigan, and so the marriage between athletics and UMS have been pretty profound, as we discuss in the book with your Bo Schembechler, and we got we've got Lloyd Carr, and then Jim Harbaugh a little bit later. These guys all played a role in some way with UMS.
And of course, that background led you to a certain young lady, Miss Penny.
Oh man! So the year is 1961. John, that's 59 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'd been there for 5 summers, so I knew my way around. And I'm looking there that first day of camp, and I see a very attractive flute player that I later learned is from Mason City, Iowa, which is the home of Meredith Willson. Well, by the end of that first week,
back that up. The creator
of The Music Man, that he patterned after Mason City. He called it River City in the musical, and Penny knew him. See, Meredith Willson was a flutist, as was Penny, and in fact, he after all of his fame, he'd come back and do little shows at the service clubs, and would bring Penny out of grade school and junior high to sort of perform with him at these service clubs. So she had a chance to get to know Meredith Willson. And anyway, that summer we dated all summer. Didn't think we'd see each other. 600 miles away, Plymouth, Michigan, Mason City, Iowa. But before the week was out, her dad, a chemistry prof, was going to a conference in Chicago, and Penny and I met on the steps of the Field Museum. I'm down on the first level. She's at the top level, just out of a movie. We all come to the center right as the clock strikes 1 o'clock. And I'm seeing her for the first time in a dress, because at Interlaken, you wear knickers. And so this was great. Anyway, we had our senior in high school in different places, went to different colleges, had our ups and downs. And by the time, at the end of our sophomore year, we went to University of Iowa for summer school, and then it was pretty much cemented.
Mm-hmm.
Penny went to Iowa and was the flute soloist in a State Department cultural exchange in 1966. Now, what was important there was she's going to be in France, she's going to be in Spain, she's going to be in Greece, and she's going to be in the Soviet Union. Get that ring on her finger before she leaves for, because she might be meeting these Italian guys, these French guys. So Fish needed to cement it. And we got married that summer, July 2nd, 1966.
Yeah, get that one right, Fish.
Well, you know why we remember that date? Not only, but this Maize and Blue,
Mm-hmm.
that's made by Alex Reed,
Mm-hmm.
Alex Fischer. He's 11 years old, and he and his brother Reed have been making these bracelets for Grandma and Grandpa, and I think they're tuned in today. Anyway, when they asked, "What do you want?" I said, "Maize and Blue," of course. So, yeah, we got Matt is married to Renee. They're living in California, and they're tuned in today.
Well, speaking of Matt, we're going to jump ahead to your time in DC.
Mm-hmm.
You're a young father. You and Penny are in DC. The strapping young couple you see photographed, of course, in this book. Some great photos, by the way, Fish, that I would never have seen otherwise. So really wonderful stuff. You're a pretty modern dad. You're taking Matt around from stop to stop. Tell us what your lifestyle was like in DC.
So there's Penny and me. Then in 1973, Matt was born, and he's our only child. Now I know you got Teddy. I don't know if they're going to be others, but
Fish, your wife has assured me that I have an only child.
Okay, well then we have some things in common besides getting dressed up today in blue shirts and dark blue coats. Well, Penny was performing in 7 different ensembles, teaching in 2 colleges, and had 40 private students.
Wow.
And working on a doctorate. And on this one occasion, she said, "Fish, I've got a chance to go and spend 2 weeks deep dive into contemporary music. We're going to all live in a barn up in upstate New York." And I looked at my schedule, and I needed to be away for 2 weeks, but I was going to Interlaken, Saratoga Springs, and Tanglewood. And we just discussed it. Made a lot more sense for Matt to come with me over those 2 weeks. I'm a resourceful guy. I don't mind picking up the phone and explaining to people. And so that began that summer when he was, what was he? A little over 2 years old, 22 months old. A 4-year adventure of his going with me on business trips. I had progressive clients. For example, the Educational Testing Service was a client who was going to be there for 3 days out in Berkeley, California. So I would call this guy, assure him that he was my first and foremost responsibility, made that really clear. But then I would say, look, I'd like to bring my 3-year-old with me. I don't want to intrude on the schedule, but maybe you could advise me on. He sent me down the hall to talk to one of the people there who had a kid in preschool, and so arrangements were made where I called the preschool, and Matt, very adaptable kid, because he would go with us to everything. He'd go to Penny's lessons, and he's a sociable kid. He was a sociable kid even then. He certainly is now. But we arranged for him to go to this preschool while I would do work during the day, and I would spend the first half hour with him, and he was in the groove right away. Then I made sure that every night we were going into San Francisco. We went to kite shops. We went to the other places you would want to take a kid. And this just began a wonderful adventure. We were in Colorado together. We were in California. We were in Texas, Florida. And I must say, I think that bonded us in a very special way that continues to today. I got to tell you, when he asked me to be his best man, when he has gazillions of friends, I was so touched. And I think it was at the Red Hawk that we had that conversation. And I used a few napkins, I must say, but it's just been such a joy. And then, baseball has been a bonding experience for us, as it is for many fathers and sons out there. But for Matt and me, it's been really special. I write in the book about his first ball game was seeing my boyhood hero, Al Kaline, get Al's 3,000th hit at Memorial Stadium. The Nationals, we didn't have a ball team in Washington at the time, but I grabbed Matt, and we got a kid to give us a ride because Penny had the car. And as Kaline got up for the second time, because he got out the first time, I took Matt off my back, put him on my lap, pointed his head towards home plate. Kaline double, first at bat. So Matt and I, in 2007, when his boyhood hero, Cal Ripken Jr., went into the Hall of Fame, Matt and I had this precious photo of Al Kaline, and we were able to tell Al, we were both there when you got your 3,000th hit. And you may remember, he only stayed in the game for another few games. So he ended up with 3,007 hits, batting average, or number of home runs, 290. Was it 299 or 390? Anyway, he was one short of whatever the turnaround was. Yeah.
I didn't care about that, to his credit. So not a records guy. So that did bond you and Matt, of course. And while we're talking, Matt flashed a message. Hi, Pops. We love you and we're here with you. So
oh, great. That's terrific. Thank you.
Everywhere. So that was DC. Your being hired at UMS was not obvious necessarily. It obviously worked out extremely well for all involved. But you were a bit of a dark horse candidate, but you had a secret weapon in Patrick Hayes and a rabbi. You had a friend here, of course, in Ann Arbor that helped you out as well. Tell us how that process worked and how the fish that we know, most of us, through UMS, how that came to be.
Well, a couple of things were happening. One, I had a couple of careers before I got into the performing arts. I was in higher education, association work. Then I had a conference design business. But in 1983, I rented the Kennedy Center Concert Hall because none of the presenters in town were interested in the King's Singers or the King's Sisters. What are you, King's what? But I knew how good they were. And it's a long story. It's in the book, but I was able to have a success with that first concert. And, I paid for one ad that year, but I never paid for another newspaper ad after that because we were able to get the radio stations to play the King's Singers music. And because these guys can sing anything from the most esoteric Renaissance music, to Billy Joel, and So It Goes. And they can do an overture to the Barber of Seville with their voices that sound like instrumentals. I mean, these guys can do anything. But I couldn't get the major presenters to say yes to do it. And I said, well, what the heck? I'll go rent the hall. And so over the course of the next 4 years, 1983 to 87, I put on concerts at the Kennedy Center. Now remember, I was just renting the hall. I wasn't an employee of the Kennedy Center. Anyway, a couple things happened. One, Matt and Penny sat me down.
Mhm.
Pops, we love you. Now, Matt at this time is like 12 years old, but when Matt had a more maturity than a 12-year-old, but he was very much a part of our family. He would sit with us. And Penny and he said, you know, you're involved in this consulting business, and that goes up and down. Now you're in the arts. You know, you've had some hits and you've had some misses, Pops. We need more stability and security in this household. Time to get a real job. And they were precious in the way they talked about it. I think Matt hinted, you know, hey, in 6 years, I'm going to college, Pops. And it was very touching, but it was also very real. What they were saying was, maybe it's time to get a real job. So hold that. Then at the same time, the search committee had started its work. And from the kitchen of the home of Lois Stegeman, whose husband, you know, John Stegman, they were doing a lot of the building in Ann Arbor. She was on the board. And my good friend, Emmy Lewis from Washington, D.C., one of the great, you know, male marketers. We were friends through the Washington Bach consort. She called me and she had a way. She'd just say, hey, big boy, your next job is in Washington. Now get a resume in here by Monday. And it was a Friday. And of course, Penny had worked for Gail Rector in the late 60s. We knew UMS. With UMS was here. I was music at noon, you know, doing it as a volunteer. But the more we thought about it, the more this made a lot of sense. Come back to Ann Arbor. And, but I needed to learn the business. And so I think any of us who've had a mentor know, if a mentor, you spend time with a mentor, 4 hours, asking him every conceivable question, like, you know, but I don't know any of these artists that Musical Society brings. Oh, Fish, it's all done through managements. Next question. But I don't know the managers. Fish, I take you to New York. You'll meet him in a couple of days. Next question. For 4 hours, we had this conversation, but I had told him at the beginning, Patrick, I'm going to ask you a question at the end and I need an honest answer. So we're totally exhausted.
This is Patrick Hayes, to be clear. Patrick Hayes.
Yeah, this is Patrick Hayes,
Your
Washington, D.C., the great impresario, the man who founded the International Society for the Performing Arts, who knew everybody, he knew presidents. It's his portrait that hangs in the green room at the Kennedy Center. I mean, he's this regard. So I'm asking him these questions. We're all done. We're exhausted. And I said, okay, it's time for the final question. I need an honest answer. Patrick, do I have it or not for Ann Arbor? And immediately he said, you've got it. Now go for it. You've got it. Now go for it. And any of us who've had a mentor, when you have all kinds of doubts and they say, you've got it. Now go for it. John, if there had been a phone there, I would have picked it up. John Reed, chair of the search committee. I'm your guy. Stop the search. I mean, he gave me that much confidence. And so it was then a matter of, you know, what do I need to do? Well, one thing, I called John Reed, but a couple of weeks later and said, Mr. Reed, I'm coming to Ann Arbor. I don't know where you are in the search, but I'm going up to Interlock. I'm driving through Ann Arbor. Any reason why you shouldn't convene the committee? And he said, no. And so I met, and I think it was the 7th floor of the law school with the committee. Mm-hmm. And I guess they liked me because things moved forward, and I was eventually offered the job in December of 1986.
Now, here's a question I've been dying to ask since I read the book, and that is that how close a candidate were you before you took the initiative? And say you basically set up your own interview, which is a pretty bold move. On your drive-through, I grant you. Would you have got an interview without that boldness? And how far would you have gotten? Do you have any idea?
Well, you know, later in his life, John Reed hinted at who some of the people were that were candidates, mm-hmm. that the Fish emerged at all among these colleagues that became my very good friends. I was just amazed. But you know, they were interested in me. We were getting towards the end, and I knew I was going to meet with a group of people that had to feel good about it. So I called John McBride, an executive search consultant in Washington, one of the best. I said, John, I'm meeting with the committee. What do I need? What are the things I need to do with this committee? He said, Fish, it comes down to 4 questions. You got to get the answers to 4 questions. What are you going to be called? To whom are you going to report? What's the compensation? And the most important, how are they going to judge whether you're succeeding or failing? You ask that question, they'll be really impressed. Well, they answered the first 3 questions. Then it was, now, Ken, do you have anything more for us? Well, I just have one question. How will you judge whether I'm succeeding or failing? As I predicted, no comment. They're looking for each other and waiting for an answer. And after a bit, I go, it's okay if you don't know how to answer that question, because would it not be better once I were here that we might have a retreat and talk together about what the goals ought to be and do them together? And I could see some brows being wiped, but I've given those 4 questions out to so many people in their last interview over the years, but certainly, how are you going to judge whether one's succeeding or failing? And so we did have that retreat, and it may have been the first retreat that particular board had been on, but of course I've been used to retreats in other organizations, but everything worked out, and I started June 1st, 1987, a very special summer.
Quick lesson in that, though, and that is taking initiative. When people ask me, up-and-comer journalists especially, ask me any advice, most of the advice I have to give is pretty boilerplate, pretty standard, but I don't see very often. A friend of mine, David McGuffin, he and I were just talking about this today. He works with CBC in Ottawa. He was NPR in DC. Show up. Woody Allen's right. 90% of success is showing up. The guys who fly to New York or fly to DC or drive through Ann Arbor on the way to Interlaken and make it a point to be there, those guys have got a great advantage over yet another email I have to get to. If you show up in person, Fish, you're an excuse for lunch. It's much better.
Well, I'm teaching arts leadership now at the School of Music, Theater, and Dance, and I have wonderful guest leaders. And one of them is Rich Homburg, who's the head of Detroit Public Television. And he comes in with, 4 or 5 things. And the one that resonates more with everybody in the class is his very simple, make the call. Make the call. And, we're all used to texting and email and so on. And he says, make the call. And it has been so effective over the years for me. And then as people have reported back to me, that made all the difference in the world. Pick up the phone and call.
You're big on picking up the phone. You're big on showing up in person. I don't know if professional photographers like David Turnley, a friend of ours, has taken more photos than you have. And you're also the fan of the handwritten note.
You got it. Yeah.
These things all matter, don't they?
Well, they do, and we were very lucky with this book that there was a gentleman and his wife, Tom McMullen, and his wife, Debbie, who wanted to help the book and help UMS with the book. And so they gave a gift that enabled many of I think 400 of the books or so to be made available free of charge to those that contributed to the Ken Fischer Legacy Endowment. And one of the things that was very important for me was to be able to inscribe those books with something meaningful about those who donated. And you're great at that too, John. Well, it's just very important, personal touch.
It's all about building relationships. And what you did when you got to Ann Arbor is you were on the warpath, if you will, to build relationships. As we discussed earlier, you already alluded to the communities, the different organizations. It wasn't just individuals. And Gail Rector, one of your predecessors, of course, a legend, naturally. My job, right before you got to Ann Arbor, Fish, I worked at Hill Auditorium as what we called a lobby attendant. So,
yeah.
To wear a coat and tie, I got paid about $5 an hour to point to the bathroom. So I got a lot of great free shows, Yo-Yo Ma and Leonard Bernstein, who are, of course, in the book, among them. But he was obviously a towering figure. but his approach was decidedly different than your approach. Care to explain?
Well, I think we need to understand the traditions from which not only Gail Rector, but his predecessor, Charlie Sink. These were legendary people in the field. And it was very much an impresario model where the power pretty much rested in individuals. Many have heard of Saul Hurok. I mean, this was the great name in classical music. He represented Van Cliburn and a number of others. It was just a different way of doing business. Now, I had grown up with sort of collective. Let's get the best ideas together. And fortunately, early on, before 1990 rolled around, I'd been able to engage three people in particular. Michael Konjoka in 1987, he was an intern. Sarah Billman, 1988, and then John Kennard in 1989. And all three of them were with me the day I retired. So we had a collective, I think, 114 years. And in each of those areas, Michael Konjoka really became one of the most prominent vice presidents for programming in the world. I mean, you look at what we were able to do to diversify the programming. Michael was right at the heart of that. Then there's Sarah in marketing and communications, whose research on audiences became so valuable. The guys who run Broadway would bring Sarah to be the speaker at the Broadway World Congresses. Then John Kennard, who inherited kind of a bit of a mess in our finances, hired him. What you need to know about John, he was the single parent of an adopted 5-year-old boy. And what meant a lot to John was, I want to be at a place that values my being a father. And if I need to go see the kids' soccer game, I don't want to feel guilty about it. I said, John, you're not only talking to a guy that's going to let you go, but our son, Matt, can become the big brother to Tony. And, John was so well qualified. He had to take a salary cut, but he just said, Ken, what matters to me is, one, I got the time for my kid that I'm not getting at my current employer, and just narrow that gap if you can over the years. But John's way of doing finance really became such a valuable method for other university presenters, but also the standalone presenters. His way of doing finances, really special. And that they were with me on the day I retired meant so much. But what that meant was, you got really talented people in each of these three areas that you need. They're all smarter than I was in their respective areas, and you just honor that smartness and then pull together a team. We also had tremendous education people and also wonderful development people, because you need. We were able to hire Kathy Arcure in 1989, who was with us for 10 years. The interesting thing about Kathy, she was the food editor of the Ann Arbor News, much better known in that area than she would be with a fundraiser. But boy, did that help us. We were able to do a Bravo cookbook, sold, many thousands of copies. And these were artist recipes. Mm-hmm. Itzhak Perlman's bean sprout salad, Jesse Norman's tea cake. That needs some work, people say. And you had Isaac Stern's hearty borscht. I think we still got a few of those copies around. I know I do at the house. So if you want one, let me know.
I can tell you this little fun fact for you. Catherine Arcure, now a friend of mine, when she was at the Ann Arbor News as the food critic, came to my 5th grade class at Martin Luther King Elementary School with Mr. Puddock. Ron Puddock was our teacher, because we had cooking class once a week. And she was fascinated by this, so she wrote a big feature story in the Ann Arbor News. I got my first quote in a paper through Catherine Arcure. So at that point, I had the media bug or something. So there we go. Through these people we all meet. But anyway, that's your staff. That's your team. We got enough time left. We got about 20 minutes here. I'd be excoriated correctly if I did not get to some of the fun stories about the big names. Let's start with Leonard Bernstein.
Well, Bernstein loved Ann Arbor before I had anything to do with him. He really loved coming here. But John, I want you to imagine the first two concerts I have at Hill Auditorium in my career are Leonard Bernstein and the Vienna Philharmonic. Now, for folks that might not know, Bernstein, just one of the great conductors, composers, pianists of our time, famous, and, a political activist. And then there was the Vienna Philharmonic, one of the great orchestras of the world. Here he is. Here, I'm so intimidated that I invite Patrick Hayes and his wife, Evelyn Swartout Hayes. Would you guys come on out and kind of help hold my hand? And what I knew was after the second of these performances, it was my job to go into that, that locker room, I want to say, dressing room, and tell Bernstein we wanted him to come back the next year, which would be his 70th birthday. So he's doing he was doing a small tour celebrating his 75th birthday. And it would be the 70th birthday and the 75th anniversary of Hill Auditorium. Now, one of the things you loved about Bernstein, he was committed to seeing every single patron that stood in line to see him when a concert was over. And so we knew that in advance. And he kind of said, could be a half hour, could be an hour, could be an hour and a half, could be 2 hours. In this case, it was, so it's midnight. I say to Patrick Hayes, would you please come with me? He said, Ken, you can handle it. So I go into the dressing room, and here's Bernstein. He's in a bathrobe. He's taking a shower. He's got a cigarette in one hand, scotch in the other. And I'm tall. He's short, and he's sitting down, and I'm standing tall. The only thing I needed to do was get down on my knee and look him in the eye, which I did. And I can't remember what I said, but I think it was unrehearsed, like, hey, Mr. B, want to have you back next year or something. But he responded, Ken, I love this town. I love the people of this town, and I love this hall. We'll be back. And sure enough, a few weeks later, he chose 4 cities, New York, Washington, Toronto, and Ann Arbor. And the tour began in Ann Arbor. There were many cities bidding on this opportunity. But, here's a guy who loved the town. He loved the people of the town. He loved the hall. And so that event of October 29, 1988 will be one of the great events in my career. We had a packed house. 1,800 people came, invited by 41 or 42 companies. Ron Weiser being the first company to say, I want 40 seats right there. And then other companies followed. And then our wonderful ambassadors, they were called the advisory committee at that time, they organized and hosted 25 dinners in homes around Ann Arbor. So John Bacon and your guest would get in your tux and you drive your car to that home where you'd have dinner. And then a bus, university bus, would come along. They say bus number 14. You'd board that bus. They'd bring you to Hill Auditorium. You'd get out. You'd have this marvelous concert. Then as you left, you got a piece of cake in a little box given to you by the kids from Ann Arbor Pioneer High School who wanted to grow attention to the fact that they were going to Vienna the following summer. And so the centerpiece of that program was Vienna sends its best to Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor sends its best to Vienna. And then you'd hop on bus 14, you go back to that home, have cordials and dessert. And John, it became the beginning of a corporate sponsorship program that has really helped us. But we needed to start somewhere. Regrettably, Bernstein died 2 years later, 1990. But Penny, Matt, and I were able to go to the memorial service for him at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. Jim Duderstadt, I'll always be grateful his inviting me to represent the University of Michigan in a procession. But that was a glorious, glorious evening.
You left out one part, Fish. He was entertaining the various students and whatnot. At 1:30 in the morning, he says, let's go to the full moon. I believe it was.
Well, I mean, what people need to know was, we decided to sell 550 tickets to that event, that Bernstein event in October, where they were going for $125 a piece. Okay, that was a lot of money 32 years ago, but we decided for students, $10. So they lined up 14 hours in advance. And Jim and Ann were our new president. I went to them and said, Jim and Ann, you might want to consider this being the first social event of your home, because I can tell you every major donor will want to come to that event. And bless their heart, the next day they came back and said, Ken, we like your idea, but we'd like to propose a different one. What if the guests that night were 30 students, 30 University of Michigan students, maybe doing what Bernstein would have been doing in his age, young composers and conductors? Was that brilliant? I asked Jim if I could modify that and say, what if 20 of those kids met that description, and the other 10 were the first 10 kids in line who spent a cold October evening from Friday 7 o'clock to Saturday 9 o'clock in the bitter cold to buy a $10 ticket to see Bernstein. And so then what I needed to do was get Bernstein to say yes to doing it. That story's in the book. It's one of the great stories about how creative Michigan students can be when they're standing in line from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. with nothing to do but write a note to Leonard Bernstein. And those notes convinced Bernstein, I got to be there. So he shows up at midnight. At 1:30, I say, Mr. B, it's time for us to go. To which he says, I don't think so. I don't think so. He goes to the piano and starts playing tunes from West Side Story and Candide. Then 10 minutes later, he says, okay, where's that place you said we could go?
That's
the
good.
Full Moon Bar down on Main Street. And he piled a bunch of those kids in his car. Others drove down, and he held court till 4:30 in the morning.
And they let him. God bless the Full Moon for that, of course.
Well, they needed to bring ID. That was
There you go. That's the one rule, of course. But a great example. No better example, in my opinion, of everybody in, nobody out. Of course, Letitia Bird, a mutual friend, passed away recently. You courted her and others. But the story of Ali Khan has got to be told here. We got about 3 minutes to tell it, Fish, because I want to get to Wynton Marsalis also. And
well, I got to tip my hat again to Michael Kanjoka, who brought a tape to a management team meeting of a Sufi devotional singer. We'd never heard anything like it. It was strange to us, but Michael said, let me tell you, he's the Horowitz of the Indo-Pakistani community. It'll be the first event to sell out. But what we need to do is build a relationship with the Indo-Pakistani community, and they will show up. And indeed, Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan was the first event to sell out in its year. And we learned so much about the importance of building relationships with that community through a particular individual or group. In our case, it was Sardar Ansari, who was able to advise us about food and about traditions and about the fact that—
Give me this one. Give me this one.
Yeah.
The dollar.
And he said, Ken and Michael, my people will reach a level of spiritual ecstasy in that concert. And the way they show their respect is they will dance to the stage, and they will place money on the stage. And you should have somebody in the lobby with $501 bills, because they'll be looking for change. I got to tell you, John, we would not have known that had it not been for Sardar Ansari. And it's the same.
Known that.
Exactly. And the food that would be served, and the fact that they would all come later than our audience comes when there's— and he said, no, Ken, you don't understand. For them, this is the highlight of the year. They will get dressed up. They'll want to be seen and appreciated. These are so important things. So we had Ismail Ahmed in the Arab community. We had Martina Guzman advising us in the Latinx community. We had Wei Shen with Chinese community. Having these critical community partners helping advise us was absolutely critical.
And the cool part was you got, as you did, of course, with Vienna Philharmonic, with Leonard Bernstein, you made Ann Arbor this little engine that could. You're not fighting against Bloomington, Indiana, or Champaign, Illinois. You're fighting New York. You're fighting San Francisco. You're fighting LA. You're fighting Toronto. You're fighting London. You're fighting, the world's cultural capitals, and you are frequently beating them, which to me was a wonderful thing. Of course, Royal Shakespeare Company, another story like that. But Ali Khan is one of the great stories. And how did the concert go off? How did it work?
Well, I mean,
Give us
we
the
were all dancing in the aisles. There was such joy there. Sari and I were arm in arm. Regrettably, Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan perished. He died a few years later, or we would certainly have had him back. But John, if I can just say, you're talking about these other world capitals. It was the Berlin Philharmonic in 1999. Its president, Peter Riegelbauer, sent me an email, and we had a subsequent discussion. But in effect, he said, Ken, there are 5 things that are special. Number one, you're the smallest town, but you deliver the largest crowd in that great hall. That's amazing to us in the Berlin Philharmonic. Secondly, you let us play the music we want to play. In this case, it was Schoenberg. Other cities are afraid of it. Your city had not heard Pelléas and Malazan before, and they all stood and cheered at the end. Third, we looked out in the audience and we saw students everywhere. We didn't see that in the other cities. And number 4, that hospitality, not only backstage, but it begins with that letter in German on the bed of every single member of our orchestra, welcoming them on behalf of the community. And you threw in that little Zingerman's coupon and that pass to the rec center. They love that stuff. 5th, you know how to take care of our conductor. Now, let me just say, he ended that with 2 things. What would you think, Ken, if 18 of us from the Berlin Philharmonic came and played chamber music for 2 weeks with your students? We couldn't do that because the only time they could come was March of 2001 when the Royal Shakespeare Company would be here. But they came with a smaller group a few years later. But the other thing he said was, let me remind you of the 9 cities on that tour. Moscow, Bonn, Paris, London, New York, Washington, Chicago, Boston, and Ann Arbor. And yours is the city we want to come back to. Now, do we love that?
Yeah, we love that. We will ask questions. If you have questions, please ask them. We still have time for that. I can stay over a little longer. I'm sure Ken can too, especially, hey, great book, of course. But I would be remiss if I don't get to the man who wrote the foreword, a beautiful foreword. He hit upon several of the same notes that you hit upon with your friend from the Berlin Philharmonic, of course. The Hill Auditorium is a great thing to sell. I spent many years there, of course, and it is true. If you're in the first balcony, I can talk to you on the stage quieter than we are now. And you and I can understand each other, no problem. The parabolic shape, of course, the perfect acoustics, but the hospitality. And Marsalis said, man, it starts when I get there for the sound check. It starts with what kind of mood the sound crew is in. It starts with, the meal we have beforehand, always with Fish himself. You don't send somebody else, or they never eat alone. All these little things do add up because you are fighting Moscow, you're fighting New York, you're fighting LA. You gotta punch beyond your weight, as we say in sports, of course. So Wynton Marsalis and your relationship with him, and thanks to you, I met him backstage. One of those great nights with the Jazz at Lincoln Center group, of course, a wall of sound that was. Please tell us a bit about your relationship with him, how you got him to write the foreword, which I'll close the great line about that. And of course, again, any questions you've got, people, now is the time. We're not going to be here tomorrow.
Well, Wynton Marsalis, I presented him 19 times, 19 times between 1996 and 2017. Then he's been back subsequently. But, he does so many things so well. I mean, he's a superb trumpeter, as we all know, but a composer, unbelievable. But he softens my heart when I see him as an educator. And I'll never forget this one day. We were honoring Wynton and Jazz at Lincoln Center. They were the Ford Honors Program honoree with our Distinguished Artist Award. And, Wynton, getting him out of the dressing room, because so many people want to see him, but there were donors and there were people waiting over at the league. And I said, Wynton, we really need to go. And he's, okay, Fish. We walk out of the back of Hill Auditorium, and there are 2 grade school boys, each with a trumpet. Wynton looks at me. We didn't have to say a word. We turn around, and he gives these kids a 15-minute lesson, because that's Wynton. And I must say, I don't think anybody minded at the League when they learned what Wynton was doing. And then the relationship deepened when we did the world premiere of one of his pieces here. We commissioned, along with others, Blood in the Fields, which is a work which he's very proud. And one of the things that I want to say is my successor, Matthew Van Biesen, when he was head of the New York Philharmonic, was able to collaborate with Wynton at Jazz at Lincoln Center. So these two leaders of key institutions, they have their own wonderful relationship that's going to be, sustained for years and years here in Ann Arbor. But one of the things I love about the foreword, he says nice things about UMS, nice things about me. But any presenter in the world, when they read that foreword, it's really about Wynton's respect for the presenter, the person that's there when they arrive, who's there when they leave, and is responsible for bringing the audience there. He happens to use UMS and Hill Auditorium as the way to tell that story. Mm-hmm. But I want to urge any presenter out there, read what Wynton has to say about us, about the performing arts presenter.
That's beautiful.
And then our niece worked for him at Jazz at Lincoln Center. Our son, Matt, who when he was doing his little round the world trip, happened to see Wynton. I think he was in France. And Wynton introduced Matt to a bunch of those friends. And they said, well, Matt, where are you staying tonight? He said, I haven't figured that out. Well, we've rented a castle. Come and stay with us. So Wynton has gotten to know a lot of members of our family. And that's one of the reasons when I invited him a year ago, July, to do it, his response was, Ken, I'd be honored to do it. I love your family. And meaning all the people that he's met over the years, Penny and Matt and Erica Floresca and all the folks. And then it was Memorial Day. Well, he would have that foreword would be due on the 1st of April, but that's the day his father, Ellis Marsalis, died. And if you read Wynton's tributes to his father, how beautiful they were. He wrote to Matthew Van Biesen and me and just said, guys, I need some more time. He submitted it on the 25th of May, Memorial Day. Had he been aware that George Floyd had been murdered before he submitted that, I don't know that we would have received it, because he was so focused on the things that matter to him, justice and equality. We're just lucky that he was able to submit it when he did, because the next day, everything erupted as that video became out there. But we had a wonderful exchange.
I was going to say this
after that,
but since you've already basically introduced it, he writes a beautiful, and the guy can write, by the way, that's as an aside. And I believe he wrote this himself, correct? It was not.
Yes, he did.
It is a 5-page foreword. It's beautifully done. And now he says, and it's past midnight when we get into the car, and Fish says, how you doing? You want to go get something to eat and talk about things? And I laugh, and I look at him, and we both start laughing. Now he's writing in his own voice. It's now 3 a.m., and the band is back on the road, and I'm saying to myself, ain't but one thing makes somebody do all the things he did night in and night out. Belief, period. And it's all up in this book.
Well, I was really touched by that. I was working with someone that day who helped Wynton deliver it, and she said, Ken, you're going to cry. We thought maybe a couple of paragraphs. It was, as you said, 5 pages, single spaced, and you bet I cried. Then I wrote to him and just was so touched, and he said, I read it again and I cried. So we got a special relationship for sure. And anyway, I see some people have been writing in like
Let's get them.
Liz.
We got in the private chat side, but on the public side, we've got Liz Stover Rosenthal. I'm sure you know her well.
Yeah.
Ken, tell us your most memorable performance of an artist making their UMS debut.
Well, you know, we had a lot of artists, but I mean, one artist. I got a story I want to tell, but we should all know that an artist making his UMS debut and his American debut was an actor named David Oyelowo of the Royal Shakespeare Company. The first time a black man was cast as an English king in the history of the Royal Shakespeare Company. So his debut in this country was here in Ann Arbor as Henry VI. And the plays were Henry VI parts 1, 2, 3, and Richard III. And if you don't know that name, he was nominated for an Oscar playing Martin Luther King in Selma. But go look up David Oyelowo. But I think the story I want to tell is, so here's Hill Auditorium, renovated and restored 2002 to 2004. And in 2004, in that January, we did 3 concerts. And there was an artist, because in giving, we wanted to give examples for each, you know, a great orchestra, the debut of an artist, chamber music, and so on. So we invited Misha Bruegger-Gosman to be that classical vocalist to perform one piece. And we had invited Audra McDonald to be that more popular artist who'd sing a couple of pieces. Well, Audra got sick. Now, I knew enough about Misha Bruegger-Gosman to know she had a whole popular side too. So she's over at the Bell Tower Hotel. And I go over and I say, now, Misha, we're so happy you're here to do that one classical thing. If we were to ask you to also add some more popular stuff, what might you be interested in doing? And she said, Bill Balcom's cabaret songs. Man, if I could do a couple of those, that'd be great. And I said, now, we can invite your accompanist to fly in to play them. Or I can call Bill Balcom right now, who lives 2 miles away, and see if he'd be willing to accompany you himself. And she shrieks. She almost broke the windows at that place. So I called Bill Balcom. He said,
did she know that Bill Balcom is on U of M faculty? That
I don't think she knew any of that. Because the shriek was so loud. So Bill came, he played those cabaret songs, and the two of them ended up recording them. And they're tremendous recordings. But you know, that's the kind of thing you can do in Ann Arbor.
Unique place, man. Unique place.
So many, you know, then Alan Gilbert, you know, Liz Rosenthal is the person that came up with the idea that why don't we have the brass of the New York Philharmonic play with a football game at homecoming in 2015. That was Liz's idea. She orchestrated all of that. And here's the brass of the New York Philharmonic playing with our alumni band, the Michigan Marching Band, the Musical Society's Choral Union, over 1,000 musicians. And they played some of the great tunes, Bolero, De Valkyrie, you know, Swan Lake, but it ends with Ode to Joy. And the gentleman who enabled the New York Philharmonic to come to that residency was a Michigan alum named Eugene Grant. He was in his late 90s, and he provided the gift that enabled his orchestra to come to play in his school. He died a few years later in 2018, but in his obituary, one of the highlights of his life was hearing Ode to Joy performed at Michigan Stadium by his orchestra, Michigan Marching Band, and so on. That is something I'll always cherish. And Liz, who's now working for the Celebrity Series in Boston, is tuned in today, and we'll always be grateful for Liz being able to orchestrate that. And you know, while some of the members, the brass, were playing on the field, we had a whole bunch of other artists playing at University Hospital and other places around town, doing what they could to give back at that time.
That, to me, by the way, is Michigan at its best. Big Ten caliber football, of course, when you got Ode to Joy playing at halftime.
Yeah.
You don't get that many places. Jen McKee, I'm sure you know her well, the great writer. She writes a great question. Would love to know what Ken thinks arts organizations can do and must do to survive during this pandemic era. And of course, your successor is doing a great job. We all agree. Very much in the fish mold of reach out, everybody in, nobody out. What can he and others do during the pandemic to keep the arts going?
Well, there was another mantra at UMS: where there's crisis, there's opportunity. So at Cecilia Bartoli cancels. You cancel the concert? No. You get everybody together. How can we be creative with this? Longer story than we have right now, but we were able to find a way that turned out to be a win-win situation. Looked bleak at the time. But let me just say about now, UMS has found a way, as have many other organizations, to find a silver lining here. And you think first of, oh God, we got to put these things online. We got to put these things on Zoom and so on. But look at the audiences that are being generated by being able to put very good, very well produced pieces. Like this past week, UMS put up Paul Taylor Dance Company with its artistic director, successor to Paul Taylor, and with our own Angela Kane here at the University of Michigan Dance, who's an expert in Paul Taylor. And they were able to run that for a week. I don't know how many thousands of people tuned in on that, but far more than would be able otherwise. A second thing that's happening is that we're getting an insider's view that we wouldn't get were this a live performance. We're going backstage. We're seeing how artists create. And I know what UMS has in mind now, till this thing is over, to give us that insider's view of what's going on. I've also heard really profound presentations by the heads of these different arts organizations. Matthew has spoken eloquently, reassuring people about what's going on and how they can remain engaged. But one of the most impressive presentations I heard was by Joe Hodge, the head of the Guthrie Theater, reassuring people that there will always be theater. Don't worry, you're seeing Zoom stuff now, but let me remind you, he talked about being at the Acropolis and looking down on the Theater of Dionysus. That's 2,500 years ago, folks, and it looks just like a theater now. Mm-hmm. Theater's going to be around. But I think, there are going to be some arts organizations that aren't going to be able to sustain this. I know how much UMS appreciated, after Yo-Yo Ma's concert, they couldn't do any more live concerts, but the generosity of the UMS family in donating back the tickets, making special gifts. And then I know the state government, local government, federal government were also responding to help out organizations. But I think UMS is 142 years old this year. It's going to be around. It has survived. You remember we had to cancel Caruso's concert in 1918. He came in 1919. And when you have an artist of Caruso's stature coming to Ann Arbor, little Ann Arbor, it was a big game changer back then. The greatest artists of the world coming to our town. So I just have great faith in the creativity, the imagination, the commitment to community that UMS has, and so many of our sister organizations around the world have. We're going to get through this.
I love that, Fish. And one thing you've basically alluded to, that I'll spell it out, as corny as it may sound, also the human spirit. And you were in the wings when I gave my TED Talk at the Power Center 8 years ago or so, 6-7 years ago at least, about the need to be together. And one of my lines was that, hey, look, if Fielding Yost went down to the Big House, if Humphrey Bogart went to the Michigan Theater with Russ Collins, if Beethoven were to walk into Hill Auditorium, they would all know exactly what is happening. It's a universal experience, and it goes back to the beginning of time, basically. And what you provide is that which connects us. We need to be together. We need to be connected. It's harder now than ever. But I would argue that's an argument for the arts, not against it, of course. The need for the arts has never been stronger. And like you said, if 1918, the Spanish flu, did not wipe out Caruso and he came back the next year, we too shall come back.
You got it.
Fish, great book. Great conversation. Thanks to Sarah. Thanks to everybody for all this, by the way. Everybody in, nobody out. He means it. Trust me. Wonderful stories.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank everybody for participating. Take care. Thank you, John.
Thank you.